I knew something was wrong before I even turned the truck off. You ever pull into your own driveway after a long day and your brain catches something before your eyes do? Like the world shifted half an inch while you were gone. That's what it felt like. I came around the bend past my tool shed, coffee thermos still sitting in the cup holder, and suddenly my mailbox looked too close to the gravel shoulder. At first I thought maybe somebody clipped it with a trailer or something, but then I looked over toward the fence line and my stomach just dropped. My fence wasn't where my fence was supposed to be. 6 feet may not sound like much to people who live packed into neighborhoods where you can hear your neighbor sneeze through the drywall, but out where I live, 6 feet is enough to notice from 100 yards away, especially when that land belonged to your father before it belonged to you. I parked the truck and just sat there for a second staring at it, trying to convince myself I was tired. Maybe the angle was weird. Maybe I was losing my mind. Then I got out and walked the line. Fresh cedar posts. Wet concrete still light gray around the base. Clean boards. Straight as a rifle shot. And my old fence, the one my dad and I built together when I was 23, ripped out and stacked like junk beside the ditch. Somebody had literally moved my fence onto my own property while I was out of town for the weekend. No call. No knock. No warning. Just a little plastic tag zip-tied to one of the posts that read, "Boundary correction completed per revised community development survey." I remember actually laughing when I read it because I thought it had to be a joke. Community development. I don't live in a community. I live on 3.5 acres outside Belmere County. Same land my father bought back when nobody wanted it because it was all brush and clay and snakes. Meanwhile, right next to me, about 4 years ago, some developer from Atlanta bulldozed 80 acres of pasture and built this shiny little kingdom called Brook Hollow Preserve. You know the type. Fake stone waterfall at the entrance, decorative lanterns, houses all painted slightly different shades of gray so people think they're custom, and an HOA board filled with folks who discovered power way too late in life. My nearest neighbor over there was a guy named Trevor Maddox, HOA president, retired orthodontist, wore loafers without socks, and somehow always smelled like expensive cologne even outside in August heat. Trevor loved the phrase, protecting property values. Said it like a preacher quoting scripture. Truth is, I think my place bothered him. My workshop bothered him. My tractor bothered him. Hell, probably my existence bothered him. Because while everybody else in Brook Hollow was planting decorative shrubs and arguing about mailbox colors, I was out splitting wood shirtless with Lynyrd Skynyrd blasting from an old radio. And I guess eventually they decided the view from their precious entrance would look cleaner if my fence moved 6 feet backward. Later I found out exactly what happened. While I was gone helping my cousin move equipment up near Knoxville, Trevor had a survey crew come out. According to him, some updated measurements showed my fence had been built in the wrong spot decades ago. And instead of talking to me like an adult, they just hired a contractor and moved it. Like they were rearranging patio furniture. I drove straight over to the Brook Hollow clubhouse that evening, gravel spitting under the tires the whole way there. The place looked exactly like Trevor. Polished stone, fake southern charm, everything smelling faintly of lemon cleaner and money. He opened the office door smiling before I even said a word. "Wes," he said, like we were old golf buddies. "I had a feeling you might stop by." I didn't yell, didn't even raise my voice. I just looked at him and said, "You moved my fence." And that smug little smile never left his face. "Well, technically," he said, straightening his cufflinks, "the fence was relocated to reflect the proper boundary line. We assumed you wouldn't object once you understood the improvements being made to the entrance corridor." Entrance corridor. That's what he called it. Like he was redesigning Disneyland instead of stealing land from somebody whose family bled into that dirt for 30 years. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. "Honestly, Wes, it just looks better this way." And right there, standing in that over-air-conditioned office with fake jazz music playing overhead, I remembered something Trevor clearly didn't know. The giant stone entrance to Brook Hollow Preserve, every lantern, every flower bed, every inch of that fancy waterfall sign, was sitting on my land. Now here's the part that makes people think I'm exaggerating when I tell this story, but I swear on my father's grave, every word of it is true. That entrance everybody in Brook Hollow loved taking Christmas photos in front of. The waterfall, the stone wall, the big bronze sign with preserve spelled out in fancy cursive. None of that was technically theirs. About 12 years earlier, before the subdivision was even finished, The original developer had come to my dad asking for a favor. Back then the company was still local, still run by a guy named Harold Bennett, not some corporate group hiding behind lawyers and branding consultants. Harold sat at our kitchen table drinking black coffee with my father for almost 3 hours. I remember because I was there replacing cabinet hinges while they talked. Harold explained that the county setback rules made the entrance angle awkward unless they could push part of the decorative frontage a little farther east onto our property. He promised it wouldn't affect anything, promised they'd maintain it, promised they'd respect the boundary. My dad was old school, handshake kind of man. He said, "Long as nobody starts acting like they own the place, I don't care." And that was it. No easement, no transfer, no signed agreement. Just trust between two grown men. The problem with trust is it doesn't survive people like Trevor Maddox. I left the clubhouse that night without another word. Trevor actually called after me as I walked out. "Once you calm down," he said, "I think you'll see this was the best solution for everyone." Best solution. I remember gripping the truck door so hard my knuckles cracked white. But anger'll make you stupid if you let it steer, and stupid was exactly what Trevor expected from me. He expected yelling, threats, maybe a viral Facebook rant. What he didn't expect was paperwork. Next morning, I was parked outside the Belmere County Records office 15 minutes before they unlocked the doors. The clerk there, old woman named Denise, knew my family forever. Soon as she saw my face, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Who died or who got greedy?" I told her probably the second one. We spent almost 4 hours digging through archived plats, survey revisions, tax maps, old development filings, and the deeper we dug, the uglier it got for Brook Hollow. Turns out the current HOA board had never even verified where their own entrance sat. They just inherited assumptions from the original developer and started treating those assumptions like ownership. Denise slid the final survey copy across the desk toward me around lunchtime and tapped the highlighted boundary with her red fingernail. "Honey," she said, "they built half their front identity on your dirt." I stared at that paper for a long time, because suddenly this wasn't about 6 feet anymore. It was about arrogance, about people convincing themselves that money and landscaping somehow overrule respect. By 3 that afternoon, I had an attorney named Caleb Ruiz filing a formal revocation notice. Caleb was one of those calm country lawyers who talks so softly people lean forward to hear him, which somehow makes everything sound more dangerous. He read the documents twice, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Legally speaking, they're in trouble." "How much trouble?" I asked. He smiled a little. "Depends how attached they are to that waterfall." The notice gave Brook Hollow 72 hours to remove all unauthorized structures from my property. Caleb said they'd probably panic and try negotiating immediately. They didn't. Trevor actually doubled down. Around 7 that evening, he showed up at my gate in a pressed polo shirt, holding a folder under one arm, like he was delivering nuclear launch codes. "Wes," he said, "I think lawyers are making this emotional." I laughed right in his face. First time all day I'd laughed. "Emotional?" I said. "You stole land while I was out of town." He kept smiling, but thinner now, tighter around the eyes. "The subdivision has invested substantially in that entrance feature. Should have invested in a survey first." He handed me the folder. Inside were printed renderings showing redesigned landscaping around my newly moved fence. They had already planned flower beds, decorative lighting. Trevor pointed at the images like a proud HGTV host. "You have to admit," he said, "this creates a much more elegant approach." I looked at him for a second, honestly amazed somebody could be that disconnected from reality. Then I handed the folder back and said, "You got 72 hours. He shook his head slowly like I was disappointing him personally. "You'd punish 300 homeowners over a misunderstanding?" That line stuck with me because technically, he wasn't wrong. Most of those families had nothing to do with this. Kids rode bikes through there. Retired couples walked dogs past that entrance every evening. And for about 5 minutes that night, sitting alone on my porch with a bourbon in my hand, I actually considered letting it go. My dad probably would have. But then I looked out toward that crooked fence line glowing under my floodlights, and all I could think about was how easily they erased him from his own land. Like his work meant nothing. Like nobody would push back. So the next morning, I made the call. The demolition crew arrived at 6:30 sharp Thursday morning. 3 trucks, 2 trailers, 1 excavator. No drama, no yelling, Just men drinking gas station coffee while reviewing permits. I stood by the fence as the foreman walked over holding paperwork. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked quietly. I looked past him toward the giant stone sign, catching sunrise light across the road. Then I said, "Yep." First thing they removed was the bronze lettering. Brook Hollow Preserve. One worker unscrewed each letter carefully while another wrapped them in moving blankets. Then came the lantern posts. Then the stone facing around the waterfall basin. Water shut off midstream, cascading down into silence. By 8 o'clock, residents had started gathering along the sidewalks in bathrobes and workout clothes, watching like they'd just discovered a fire at Disneyland. Somebody filmed on their phone. Somebody else yelled that they were calling the police. Police actually did come. Deputy named Marcus Hale. Marcus walked over, checked the permits, checked the property maps, then shrugged. "Looks legal to me." Trevor arrived 20 minutes later in a black Mercedes, moving way too fast through the subdivision entrance that technically no longer existed. He jumped out before the car fully stopped. I had never seen a man unravel so quickly. "Stop this immediately," he shouted, marching toward the excavator. "You can't destroy private property." Caleb, my attorney, stepped calmly between them and handed Trevor the county filings. Trevor skimmed maybe 2 pages before his face lost all color. "This is insane," he whispered. Caleb adjusted his glasses. "No, Mr. Maddox. Moving somebody's fence without permission was insane." Trevor turned toward me then, eyes burning. "This is retaliation." "No," I said. "This is correction." And right then the excavator hooked chains around the centerpiece wall. You could actually hear the stone crack when tension hit it. Residents gasped. One woman covered her mouth like she was watching a funeral. The wall tilted slowly, dramatically, then came down in one thunderous collapse that echoed across the entire subdivision. Dust rolled through the morning sunlight while water from the broken fountain spread across the pavement like a flood. And for the first time since this whole thing started, Trevor looked scared. What happened after that wall came down was honestly crazier than the demolition itself. Because the second Brook Hollow lost that entrance, the whole illusion cracked with it. Up until then, the subdivision had felt sealed off from the rest of Belmere County, like its own polished little bubble where every lawn looked vacuumed and every porch had matching seasonal decorations. But once the sign disappeared and the stone barriers came down, it just looked like another road. And people treated it that way immediately. Delivery vans started cutting through because GPS rerouted traffic through the neighborhood. Teenagers from the next county over started using the long curved streets to race at night. Random fishermen parked near the retention pond because they thought it was public access. Within 2 days, the Facebook community page for Brook Hollow turned into absolute warfare. Somebody leaked screenshots later, and I swear half those people sounded ready to start a civil war over decorative property values. One woman wrote, "I moved here specifically because the entrance conveyed exclusivity." Another guy blamed Trevor directly and said the HOA board acted like a dictatorship with flower beds. Meanwhile, Trevor spent 3 straight days trying to corner me into reversing everything. He showed up at my workshop Friday afternoon while I was changing hydraulic fluid on my tractor. Didn't even say hello. Just stood there in loafers sinking into the dirt staring at me like I'd personally burned his house down. "The residents are furious," he said. I kept working. "Sounds uncomfortable." "You made your point." "Did I?" That irritated him more than yelling would've. Trevor was the kind of man who needed reactions. Silence made him itch. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "You know they're calling you vindictive." I wiped my hands on a rag and finally looked at him. "Trevor, your board trespassed on my property, removed a legal structure, altered a tax boundary, and tried to pretty it up afterward like I should thank you for it. What exactly did you think was going to happen?" He opened his mouth, closed it again, then tried a different angle. "The subdivision will compensate you for the land. It's not for sale. Everyone has a number." That one hit something deep in me because I'd heard people say versions of that my whole life. Developers, investors, realtors, like land only mattered in dollars per acre instead of memories. My father used to stand out near that fence line every spring checking soil after the rain. Said you could tell how healthy land was by the smell of it warming under sunlight. Hard to explain that to people who think ownership starts and ends with paperwork. Trevor looked around my workshop while I stayed quiet. Old fishing gear hanging on the wall. My dad's rusted tackle box still sitting near the bench. family photos above the tool cabinet. I think for the first time he realized this wasn't just dirt to me. But by then it was too late. Monday morning, the HOA board requested a formal meeting. They held it inside the Brook Hollow clubhouse, except this time the atmosphere felt completely different. No smug smiles. No fake jazz music. Half the board members looked exhausted. One woman kept rubbing her temples like she hadn't slept in days. Caleb sat beside me, flipping calmly through documents while Trevor stared out the window, avoiding eye contact. The numbers apparently got ugly fast after the entrance disappeared. 2 pending home sales stalled over security concerns. Insurance questions started coming in because technically the decorative lighting system had never been properly permitted on my property. Residents threatened lawsuits against the HOA for unauthorized land alterations. And my personal favorite, the county began reviewing whether Brook Hollow had been paying accurate frontage taxes for years. Suddenly, everybody wanted peace. The first offer was moving my fence back and covering replacement costs. I said no. The second offer included financial compensation. I said no again. Trevor finally snapped a little. Then what exactly do you want? The room went quiet after that. I leaned forward slowly and looked directly at him. I want acknowledgement. He frowned. Acknowledgement of what? That you don't get to erase people just because they don't fit your view. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then one of the older board members, retired school principal named Evelyn Carter, sighed softly and said, "He's right." Trevor looked at her like she'd betrayed him. But the truth was obvious by then. This whole thing started because they couldn't stand that my old country property interrupted their polished entrance aesthetic. My fence embarrassed them. My workshop embarrassed them. I embarrassed them. And instead of respecting the boundary, they tried to quietly push me backwards 6 feet at a time. Once that truth settled over the room, negotiations changed completely. By the end of the meeting, we reached an agreement. Brook Hollow would rebuild my original fence exactly where it belonged using upgraded materials approved by me. The HOA would reimburse years of incorrect tax assessments caused by their unauthorized survey revisions. They'd cover all legal fees. And most importantly, they would sign a permanent easement agreement acknowledging in writing that the subdivision entrance existed solely by my permission. Every inch of it. Caleb made Trevor read that clause out loud before signing. Petty? Maybe. But I won't lie. That part felt pretty good. About a month later, they rebuilt the entrance. Smaller this time. Simpler. No giant waterfall. No oversized stone monuments pretending to be some luxury resort. Just a clean wooden sign, modest landscaping, and a narrow lantern path leading into the neighborhood. Honestly, it looked better. More honest somehow. Every now and then people ask if I regret any of it. Truthfully, sometimes. Not because I think I was wrong, but because once you pull a mask off a community, you can't really put it back. Some neighbors wave at me now. Others still glare when they drive past. Trevor moved out 6 months later after losing the next HOA election in a landslide. Last I heard, he bought a condo in Florida with a waterfront association strict enough to probably make him feel right at home. As for me, I still walk that fence line some evenings around sunset. Same land, same dirt, same quiet my dad loved. And every time somebody drives through that entrance beside my property, whether they realize it or not, they're crossing on a ground that exists there because one stubborn old handshake was finally replaced with ink. But I'll leave you with this. If you were in my position, would you have stopped after they moved the fence back? Or would you have torn the whole entrance down too? Because depending on who you ask around Belmere County, I'm either the guy who defended his family's land or the asshole who went too far.